And today I like to start off like I usually do with all of my webinars. I kind of like to set the stage, do a level set of where we are facing today's threat landscape. And as we look through some of these statistics, this is only a snapshot of what we're currently facing today. But since the onset of COVID, since the pandemic alone, the threat actors have taken strong attention to our end users. And we all know that they are our weakest link in our organization. And the number one threat vector that they are using against our organizations is our email systems. So we have seen that 93% of cyber attacks have invoked a business email compromise at some point. 21 days, that is the average of the impact of a major cyber attack against organizations. And what is scary about that statistic is that is only the average. And so when we look at what complete or heavily impacted operational impact would be to our organizations, we look across 21 days. There are some organizations that find that much faster and can get that resolved and mitigated. But the scary part of that statistic is there are organizations that it takes longer for them to detect and respond and come out of a cyber attack like that. So just take a minute and pause and think about what 21 days of complete disruption would be like for your organization. 1 to 5 a.m. I'm going to tell you, I've been in this industry long enough. I have been through more ransomware incidents than I can count. And we're not going to see ransomware detonate on a Monday afternoon at 2 o'clock. They know that most organizations do not have the resources, the funding, the staffing that they can provide 24/7 response to cyber attacks. So we see that window of 1 to 5 a.m. is when the actual trigger is pulled. And so you think, is your team capable in a position to where they can respond, or even you yourself? I will not lie. I am a heavy sleeper. If my phone goes off at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going to be very hard pressed to wake up and answer that call. 200 days. So this statistic I see fluctuating throughout the year, but 200 days is the average that it takes for an organization to realize that they have had data exfiltrated from their organization. We call that the mean time to detection. And so you think about the sensitive the sensitive information that you have on your network, whether it be intellectual property, HR files, financials, things like that. 200 days that someone could be in there reading those documents, slowly trickling a copy of those documents out of your organization without you even knowing. And so as we discussed today, we'll talk about the type of visibility as we transition into this new era of cyber attacks. 60% of small businesses have some kind of compliance control. So whether it be coming from a regulatory body like PCI, could even be their insurance company that are, everyone gets those questionnaires every year, and those are changing and becoming more stringent. But that is some kind of compliance that you have to maintain in order to keep that policy. But an additional piece to that is if I look at organizations that I've talked to over the course of the last several years, almost every single organization has some kind of compliance that they have to abide by, whether they realize it or not. And so you're looking at insurance companies now requiring MDR or MFA. MFA has been a very strong suit in the last couple of years. And so being unable to be aware of that creates a huge visibility gap within the organization. Then we get into the actual visibility problem. This is what I would look at a high level. When I used to manage an IT department back in the day, I'm probably going to date myself several times today. We look at the tools that we brought in, and those tools are siloed by design. We bring them in for a purpose. They each have their own console. They each have their own login, and that creates a bunch of different issues for us as IT leaders. So whether it is securing another platform, multi-factor authentication, access control, or even just having the ability to look at information when you need to look at it. You got to go across multiple platforms to see that. It's not designed to be a centralized perspective. Creates hidden activity. So as we are going through this modernization where we are transitioning to the cloud more and more, We're seeing things like SaaS-based applications, shadow IT becoming a very big problem for organizations because they don't have the visibility into what's going on and how to react to that. We came from this design where everything was on-prem. When I ran shop, I had everything in print or on site as much as possible. My leadership was very adverse to moving to the cloud. Eventually, we had to transition that way. So we create a whole new risk in our organization as we start transitioning our applications and our data to cloud platforms. We have no behavioral insight. So a lot of tools today say, hey, we look at anomalies, behavior heuristics, but we go back to that siloed tool. That's just one piece of the puzzle. All of these things that I've talked about has created delayed detection and response. Because we can't see these, we're not monitoring that, we don't fully understand the platform or what we should be looking at, that is all creating the opportunity for threats to set in our organization longer, increasing that dwell time, and overall making a larger impact on our organization when something does go sideways. But that all compounds to a huge recovery cost. If we're unfamiliar with the platforms and the tools that we have available and we don't have that visibility, in order to get that business back up and operational, it increases much more time and much more financial burden on the organization. So we're going to walk down a little, history lane here, the evolution of cyber threats. So I'm going to date myself. Sadly, I can say that I have been involved in IT, managed IT through all of these different little scenarios. And this is only a snapshot in time, but we look as to how threats have evolved over time. We go back into the 1990s and we were dealing with basic worms, basic viruses. We were using signature-based antivirus to detect those. And we look at how that was really designed. Signature-based antivirus was strictly reactive. We had to wait for something to happen to someone somewhere before those, the companies that we use, the Trends, the Symantec's, all of those, we had to wait for them to create those signatures of detection. And then we had to wait for our organization's agents to receive those signatures before we could be protected from that threat. We move into the 2000s, and that's where we saw a very large uptick in phishing scams, where it was the email came in, or your desk. I can remember Windows XP being taken over with the big screen. They changed the screens, the background, saying, "Hey, send me money." And so whether it was a spoof or real, we had to shift our gears and start focusing on how do we empower our users to not click that or to recognize that and raise that to where our awareness as IT staff could respond to that. Transitioning into 2010s, that's when we started talking about APTs, those advanced persistent threats. We started to get nation state attacks where we had bad guys across the globe that were doing this for fun or doing this for political or monetary outcomes for them. But we had to shift our gears now where we had to move from that reactive state and start trying to think ahead of the bad guys and start trying to put measures in place that we were seeing as a commonality throughout the threat landscape. 2015 is probably when I pinpointed we really started to see the evolution of ransomware. It became mainstream where we were seeing it on the news. We were recognizing large organizations that were being compromised, even government entities. But that is where we truly got to the point where the bad guys were leveraging encryption of our data against us in order to make, a buck, if you will. And we look today at today's landscape. We're looking at the expanding risk surface across organizations as we transition to the cloud and as we have AI being introduced into cyber attacks. There's so many things going on right now. So many people are trying to create tools, and we go back to that methodology of a siloed tool, and they might be great for one purpose, but we're missing the whole picture overall. And as we look going forward, AI, I think, is going to play out a big factor into cyber attacks. I have been in the industry long enough, started off in public education. I understand what it means to manage an IT budget. And I will tell you, with the ransomware incidents that I've been involved with, they have more access to more money and resources than probably all of us on this call today have collectively. One of the ones that I went through, it's been a couple years ago. It was a very large local government entity that they were able to get ransomware injected into the organization. They were down for almost 45 days. And so they were not able to take payments from utilities. They were not able to collect, from their garbage pickup, process water bills. They were completely impacted. 911 center. And so because they lacked those type of controls of what to expect next and the visibility, it almost set them up for failure. And so I look for those type of attacks to even become more rampant as the bad guys use automation and AI to kickstart their attacks. We get into the cybersecurity, the maturity snapshot, if you will, of how we as IT engineers, administrators, leadership have how we've had to adopt and respond. Through the 1990s and 2000s, and when we started to get to where we had access to stateful firewalls, where we could start monitoring traffic in and out, but it was only in the seven layers and only on a connection based activity. Again, we talked about the security awareness. We started to see more organizations adopting security awareness programs where we were training our end users how to raise the flag and be that human firewall, as you hear, that they can be an asset if we empower them. Signature based antivirus, I mean, that's what we depended on. And we did our best to install it on all the devices that we could. 2010s and 2020s, this is where I saw the alphabet soup show up. We've got all of the EDRs, MDRs, CDRs, all of those showed up, and we had to make sense of what each one of those did. They each had a unique purpose. Endpoint detection and response protected our endpoints. Managed detection and response made sure that we had someone that was overseeing our EDR solutions and were able to respond. And hopefully, those were designed to be 24/7. But again, it was only focused on endpoints. NDRs, where we get into the network detection response, show up where we started to see activities across the network, telemetry, the activities that were going on outside of the endpoints, seeing where data could be leaving the organization or even moving laterally within our organization. Cloud detection and response. This is when we started to adopt cloud and SaaS-based platforms, and now we had to have services engaged that could protect those subject matter experts that could see that activity and knew how to respond if things were happening to our cloud platforms. And then XDR was designed to try to bring a central pane of glass to as much of those as they could. Some XDRs were better than others, and some might have pulled in just only pieces of what I talked about. We got into making sure that we had offsite or offline backups. We realized that several of the backup vendors, if things were not configured correctly, a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this, this is a skeleton in my own closet. I had a site to site VPN that I replicated a copy of my backups to another one of my locations. Lo and behold, the bad guys realized this as well. And we saw activity where they were reaching across to my other site. We were able to stop it in time, but the bad guys knew our typical stack as well. And that's how we had to shift and adjust to those offsite and offline backups. Vulnerability management became a key indicator for us during this time period. We realized that just patching our operating systems and our servers and workstations was only a touch at the surface of what vulnerabilities we might have exposed. I didn't like updating my Exchange servers or my SharePoint servers, and usually I was behind on my patching. I knew almost guaranteed that if I was to update Exchange or SharePoint, that I was going to have to stay late that night because something would always go wrong. I would have to do some additional work after doing a patch to one of those systems. But we started to realize how those vulnerabilities were contributing to the risk of our organizations. Then we got access to next generation firewalls. This is when we were able to start seeing botnets and command and control servers started to be able to have the ability to do geo filtering. If we didn't want to have access coming in from a country across the globe, we had now had the access and the ability to go in and create rules that we just would not accept traffic from those locations. And as we look from now going forward, these are things that we must find a way to anticipate and find ways to incorporate security into our stack to prepare. 24 by 7 response is a must. So it's great that we have some tools in house that say, hey, we watch you, we monitor around the clock, but are they willing to respond? And when we look at 24 by 7, it's got to be more than just the endpoint. We've got to look at all of the other things that I've discussed as we transition to the cloud. That type of response is going to be required for that as well. I just was on a call with a client the other day. They're looking at moving their SAP to the cloud. And so they wanted to go through a risk analysis of what they might expect would be the risk surface of that after that migration. AI attacks. This one, I'm going to put just an ellipses after this. A ... because we have no idea what the bad guys are going to be utilizing AI for next. The best that we can do is understand AI, understand how we can use that to protect the organization, understand the different AI platforms that are out there, and find ways to adopt and adapt to be able to mitigate any risks that we're introducing by bringing AI in-house or that the bad guys have access to. We have to get to where we have a faster detection and response than ever. Because as these AI tools transition and they start using cloud resources, and I won't even talk about what the rabbit hole could be once quantum computing is rentable from the big companies, AI attacks will be rampant, and we have to be prepared for that. And we have to have expertise. I mean, I managed a shop for about 10 years. I tried to send my staff to, professional trainings, but there's no way in the world that I can now expect them to be a subject matter expert in everything that we were responsible for inside of our RT organization. We managed a global company where we had users at just about all time zones around the clock. And I had to have my guys be able to manage that and respond to that as well. A little myth buster here is, I hear this quite often in discussions is I'm a small organization. The bad guys, they won't attack me. We don't have anything valuable for them. And I would have to say that statistic that goes along with that kind of proves that is a lie. Small organizations, medium organizations are attacked just as frequently as larger scale enterprise organizations. The difference is we hear about the larger scale organizations, the government entities on the news. The news doesn't care that, a small business in rural Kansas had ransomware last week. It might not have impacted anybody that might have heard that news, but we're seeing the same amount both ways. And so the bad guys, they know that they want to include small businesses in their attack structure because they know how susceptible and how vulnerable they are. They know they have limited budgets and smaller staff sizes. They don't have the support and staff that is needed to protect that organization to recover from that. I've worked with enough of the threat actors across the year, and I call them honest pirates because it sounds crazy, but they really do run a valid business model. They know if they spray it out there and they get 4 or 5 attacks that are successful, it's almost a guaranteed payday for them. The best thing that we can do is protect our organizations where when they do come knocking, that they realize that it's not going to be an easy feat. And unfortunately, I have to say, move on to an easier target. So we as leaders have to make the decisions and the implementations to protect our organizations. We don't want to be a part of the statistics that is a successful attack. As we look at across 85% of organizations, this is as a whole, has experienced some sort of cyber attack in the last 5 years. We hear about the government getting attacked, and the government moves slow. Budgets are restricted, and it takes a while to get those controls in place. And so we have to do better as leaders and be prepared for if and when that day was ever to come. I am sure you, whether wherever you read your cybersecurity news at, your TLDR, whether you're looking at LinkedIn, resilience is becoming a hot topic. And as we look at how cyber attacks have increased just exponentially since 2025, with the adoption of AI, resilience is a key player of that. And it boils down to, do we have the tools, the resources in place to be able to respond, react, and recover quicker? Only 15% of organizations, and just in my conversations with organizations alone, this statistic pretty much adds up as well, have some sort of 24 by 7 monitoring. And then I dissect that a little bit more, and then we get into what is being monitored. A lot of that 15% has some kind of SOC services just on their endpoint devices. So they're missing out on the complete visibility of everything that they have going on in their organization, their cloud and network telemetry. 30% of organizations have a complete inventory of all of their network devices. Coming from a DoD contractor, that was one of the things that we had to do, but I do not see it very often. We had to go in and account for every single device that was touching the network, and we had to be able to track that device in a unique manner. And I don't see many organizations that has that type of visibility and inventory across their whole org. So, I mean, you've got 60% or 70% of organizations that have devices that are on their network that might have no way of knowing who or what or where that device is at. We look at roughly 70% of organizations across the globe are basically allowing, if you are inside of their network, if you are a trusted user inside of my network, you can go wherever you want to on the internet. I was guilty of this as well. I might put a few controls in there saying, hey, you can't talk to a couple of companies. Maybe I put some content filtering in there saying, hey, you can't access adult content, or maybe I don't want you to place your sports bets during the workday. But that's what most organizations do. And so by only having those type of controls, we're not monitoring everything that might be leaving our organizations, and the bad guys are counting on that. They want to be able to find a way into the organization, establish themselves, and then find data that might be, crucial to your business, sensitive, to the organization. And as they slowly start trickling that out, if we're not monitoring that type of activity and where it's going, we have set ourselves up for failure of knowing exactly what's going on. We get into modern day SOC operations. And this is where we have brought together the right people, the right process, and the right tools. And I mean, with that tech, we incorporate the pieces that we need to have the total visibility. But there's a couple places that this falls short. SOCs are set to respond by design. So we create the alerts, we create the triggers. What do we want to be an indicator to us? Do we trust on the vendor to do that? In-house expertise, maybe some general threat hunting. If we get a flyer from a vendor saying, hey, there's a vulnerability here, and we can incorporate that into our process book. But they're designed to be responsive. And so where they lack is being able to have that forensics response after detection. Most of the time when we go through any kind of threat exercise or a cyber attack that we had to go through and do a full reaction, a full incident, the SOC goes through and secures the threat, mitigates the threat, and remediates it the best that they can with what they have in front of them. And then if it does escalate, if there was places that we had gaps or that we weren't sending information to the SOC, We can't blame them because they didn't have visibility of that. Then that turns into a full all out incident response engagement. Usually that is dictated by insurance companies if there's a cyber insurance policy in play. If not, we have to make the decision. Who do we call and who do we bring in? I've seen this play out more times than I could just even want to try to count. So having that piece of the lacking visibility of everything that's going on leads to those type of attacks where we have to bring in traditional incident response services after the fact, after the damage is already done, and we look towards the sock of why they were not able to detect that. Just for something for you to ponder today, your next threat already lives inside of your blind spot and you have no way of seeing it. And there's a large impact with that. And it goes back to what we've talked about of having complete inventory, complete visibility of all the devices that touch your network, whether it be IoT devices, OT devices, even Apple TVs, Roku TVs that we have in a conference room. Organizations that I've worked with, we allow our HVAC vendors to have internet access to their devices. Are we monitoring that? Do we have that type of inventory? Those are some things I want you to think about today. And I want to talk through a case study that we've recently done internally. And even though we're going to be talking about a manufacturing customer, I want you to think that this is applicable to almost every industry. Every vertical suffers for some of these same kind of problems that played out. Organization had typical an IT security stack. They went through an attack, and it was identified that one of their OT devices was plugged into their IT network. Proper segmentation wasn't set up. Inventory wasn't done of the OT devices. And so they brought us in to see how we can take that and build upon that and secure that security posture. Challenges that we had is the IT team did not have a complete inventory of all the technology. It goes back to what we've already talked about, where we need to understand all of the pieces that fall under our purview, not just the endpoints and servers. OT devices remained unpatched and unprotected. And so by design, most IT or most OT devices are meant to be on a separate network. They're not meant to intertwine with the IT network. But they had no clear lines, no delineation between where those boundaries should lie and how easily it would be for someone to walk through and pick up a cable that was unplugged on the floor, plug it in, and now all of a sudden an OT device became a device that we have on the IT network. They lacked the mature visibility across the entire stack of the network, the cloud, the endpoints, the IoT environments. And that included everything on the IT network or the OT network. And then as this company was going through large mergers and acquisitions, I mean, they had several thousand endpoints and they were continuing to add to that every year. It created an additional visibility gap that the IT team was really truly unaware of because they didn't know what they were, absorbing control of during these mergers and acquisitions. So the solution that we came up as we sit down with them at the table was we helped them put together a forensics-led cybersecurity team for those high risk operations. We understood the business case that they had IT and needed to have OT, and we needed to make sure that we created those boundaries that we talked about. The team implemented comprehensive visibility across all of the accurate asset inventory. So once we were able to work with them and understand every device that they were responsible for, now we were able to make sure that we had the correct controls in place to make sure that they were protected effectively. And then they standardized on onboarding technology as they went through new acquisitions. So now that they understood what they needed to be monitoring and how it needed to be monitored, now that became streamlined as new mergers and acquisitions played out. And the results that we had come out of that engagement with that customer, we were able to establish clear accountability across the whole platform, across the whole spectrum of all of their technology, whether that lived on the IT network or whether that lived on the OT network. They had a complete inventory and knew what belonged where and why. So they were quickly able to recognize in the event something like that happened again, they could identify that device and we could get the mitigation in place much more rapidly than what they went through. They filed zero cybersecurity insurance claims over 5 years, and that's still rolling today. I'm going to knock on wood because that's a very successful number. I will tell you, cybersecurity insurance is not getting cheaper. I have already personally seen 2 insurance companies in the US close down because of how much they were paying out in cybersecurity claims. They were smaller organizations, and then that led to them closing the door. They could not keep up with how rampant and how fast the threat actors were attacking their clients. Early detection kept them from moving and increase the overall uptime. I mean, this is huge. When we can put this kind of statistic of doing the right thing in a methodical way and can show that that doesn't have to disrupt the business, we're able to respond and mitigate anything that does come up without disrupting the business. That is just all the win for everyone on the team. Leadership reduced the overall financial risk by containing incidents before they became high impact breaches. So by us having tools in there, us going to the table with a great plan, a great strategy, and implementing that, making sure everybody was aware of their parts, now that the organization was able to save money and make more money based on that type of a solution. And we're able to provide forensic-based proof that now guides the strategic implementation based on root cause analysis. And so anytime an incident does play out, we're able to go through and provide that forensics evidence of exactly how it happened, what users or devices were involved, what steps do we need to take as a team to mitigate that risk, put those mitigations in place, and we have confidence that we were able to completely remove that threat. Another thing to ponder here, and I think there'll be a poll question that will come up with this, is we look at, are you truly prepared or are you exposed? 68% of the organizations, on an average, do not have a formal incident response plan. And I would say this is very, very crucial to the success of an organization in today's time. I have been through more ransomware incidents than I can't even try to put together anymore. And I'll tell you, in almost all of those, we lost the most crucial first several hours of an incident. Once we got everybody into the room, the first thing that played out is there was finger pointing, there was blaming, because IT would blame leadership because they didn't approve the budget. Leadership would blame IT because they didn't do the right thing, or how did we get to this? So there was not a formal incident response plan of how we should respond to whenever something did happen to our organization. There will be a time to sit back and, in the Army, we call it an after action review, AAR, hot wash. Maybe that's over a beer at the bar later. But in the immediate time, we need to be focused on, how do we contain this threat? How do we identify it? How do we mitigate it, eradicate it? And then if there is recovery that's involved, what are the steps to get the organization back up and operational? So having that incident response plan is very crucial. And then we get into where I was talking to our SOC incident response manager the other day, is how do we help organizations go through and practice these? Because it's great to have it on paper and to say that we have it and the steps are drawn out. But if we don't test that on an occasional basis, we're not helping ourselves if that day was to ever come. Another thing that I've seen with incident response is, coming into some of those incidents that I've been in, is I get on site as the incident commander and I say, hey, can you give me an asset inventory of your hardware and your software? And can you give me a copy of your incident response plan? And they look at me and with the glaze over their eyes, and they say, well, we have all of that, but it's one of the documents that's encrypted. So just food for thought. I'm not saying any practices that I did are the best habits out there, but I had a hard copy of those type of documents as well. I made sure that my team had access to my office and where I kept those, to make sure that if I was on a plane headed to the Middle East, that if something happened, they knew where to go get that information. So if it's not something you have in place, I would highly recommend that this becomes an action item within your organization very soon. And so, just a quick poll. I'd like to poll the crowd, and feel free to chime in. How many of you actually do have an incident response plan that you have put together with your organization right now? Oh, that's good. I see some yeses. Makes me feel good. That's good. And I wish we had more time today, because I would love to dive into those statistics of, it's great that you have one. Has it been tested? And do you test it on a regular basis? And is it a live document where we are constantly looking for ways to improve that? That's good. Thank you, everyone, for participating in that. All right. So, the compass approach. And so, one of the things that I can pride ourselves on, our team, is we have stepped back and we looked at the way things are evolving, and what we need to do to be better service providers. So we have our fully managed IT MSP, and that's where we introduce the foundation of security. Then we have our managed SOC services, our managed security services, where we bring that managed detection and response into play. And this is where we have that 24 by 7 visibility. We bring in the information from things like the firewall, and from the devices themselves, and from the network. And then, with the addition to what we have for our digital forensics with our Apex security offering, now we're able to get forensics investigation as we go through in parallel with a SOC response. So, where we have traditionally had that incident response after the fact, we have found a way to bring that forward into our SOC operations. And now we do that in parallel. And then we have advisory services that we wrap around with our VCSOs, that basically are the commander of those type of programs. So those are our security experts that are working with our clients to make sure that we understand where you are as an organization, what risks that you might be experiencing, and some that you might not even realize, doing those type of baseline assessments, and then building that strategic roadmap of how can we continue to move that security roadmap forward, not allowing that to get stagnant. And a little bit deeper about how Apex plays out in the response, and how it eliminates the response delays, where we have traditionally had SOC operations that would detect the threat, move that into a triage to understand what's going on, figure out what the best course of action was, gathering what information we could from wherever we were having data come from that organization. Now we're able to run in parallel, where we have immediate escalation with the SOC. So that continual forensics, we can inject that from the very beginning, to where we start collecting that forensic information, that evidence, if you will, from the very beginning, so we can start to reconstruct that attack and see how it played out. That unified visibility, where now we have that 24 by 7 monitoring to close all of the gaps of the things that we've talked about today, the endpoints, the network, the cloud. We're able to pull that information in, and then that plays into the forensics investigations. We have human led investigators that are driving this. That this isn't designed to be based on AI, and if you see this, do this. These are humans behind the keyboard that are working alongside the team, that are pulling that evidence, collecting additional telemetry from wherever we can, and running in parallel that investigation of incident response as we are working to mitigate and respond to the threat that has arisen. And what this leads to is much quicker containment and recovery. So by having all of those pieces in play, the SOC operations and collecting as much information as we can, having that continuous forensics where we're able to collect more information than we typically see, or what would an incident response company come in and want to gather. Now we're bringing that all together into one funnel where these teams work hand in hand to contain these threats and find a way that we can close these doors as quickly as we can. And as we look at continuous forensics, I mean, you're going to see it as CFIR out in the industry. But as we look at how this is going to benefit the organization overall, we got real time visibility. So now we're able to collect much more information across the whole organization, and that is on a continual basis, wherein it's continually to be analyzed and scrutinized as just normal operations are playing out. Threat investigations. Now the analysts are able to investigate alerts with full behavioral context. So where we've traditionally had SOC operations be a set the alert when the trigger is hit, they respond. Now we're able to bring that information in and we're able to analyze it as it's coming in, and we can detect where anomalies or put together behavioral patterns have might led to where we are. Immediate containment. So having this type of visibility, this type of information available, now we're able to move to an immediate containment. So investigation can begin as soon as a threat is detected, or even a signal. Maybe it's not a full-fledged threat yet. We can get into, that anomaly-based or behavior-based activity that's going to lead to a containment where we've might already picked up the patterns, and we can contain this much, much quicker now. And just like if any of you have actually worked with incident response, the whole thing that it boils down to is the forensics evidence of how this played out. How did this happen to us? And so if you've ever seen an incident response report, they do their best to pinpoint how this attack might have originated and played out in an organization. And I've seen several insurance companies come back after the fact and say, hey, you had an insurance policy with us and you said that you were doing X, Y, and Z. Based on that incident response report, we've been able to determine that you didn't have those type of controls in place. And now we would like some of the money back that we paid out for a policy claim. And I hate to see them playing out, but now the insurance companies are getting smart, realizing that they're on the losing end of the stick. And, in some organizations, IT staff doesn't even see the insurance questionnaire every year. And so by companies saying that we're doing this, these type of companies are coming back, insurance companies coming back now saying, oh, we've proven that you weren't. But all of this builds and puts together operational forensics. I mean, this is built into the daily operations of the SOC. So now we have taking that approach of SOC operations, finding the threat, mitigating the risk, and isolating that threat, to now having to move to an incident response where we might have not had visibility. Now we bring that forward where it's all happening in parallel. And now we secure the organization in a much more effective manner. And another poll question come up is, how many of you out there right now do have 24 by 7 SOC monitoring with response? And when I ask this, I want you to think about the things that we've talked about. Does that include endpoints in your cloud applications, your network, firewall telemetry? So is someone monitoring that 24 by 7 ready to respond? Oh, good. These are high numbers. Good. Proud of all of you. All right. So then we move into, what does complete visibility look like? So we talked about several of these, but really what this boils down to is as IT leaders, we need to get to where we understand our technology. We need to have a full inventory of everything that we've got under our oversight. So our devices, whether it be on-prem in the cloud, our users, our applications, these are all threat vectors or risk surface that the bad guys will try to utilize threat vectors to exploit. Real-time monitoring. We have to incorporate that real-time monitoring across all of these things. Network traffic, endpoint traffic, our traffic with cloud applications and our SaaS platforms. We go back to the very beginning of the conversation today, those siloed tools. We have to move away from that mindset and get to centralized solutions where we're able to bring those solutions under one pane of glass where we have that complete visibility across our organizations. Um, we just need to remove that type of risk surface from within the organization. And as we look at the cost of lacking visibility, I mean, this is not this needs to become a business priority. This just isn't IT anymore. This really boils down can back to resilience and can we position an organization to survive an attack in today's threat landscape. And some of the things that if we look at, that type of inaction, if we are not at that point yet or can't get to that for whether it be for budget reasons or reasons, here are some of the things that we're going to face as organizations. And I will tell you that I've seen all of these numerous times. Organizations are going to face financial loss, whether it is going to be because we're down for 3 weeks, like we talked about, that average of 21 days. If we are not operating as a business, we're losing money. We can't collect money. We can't pay. We can't go through and do what we're supposed to be doing as a business. And the business is going to incur a financial loss from that. Some of the ones that I've talked about, those ransomware incidents, I've even had to factor in the conversations with leadership at the table. If we're down for 3 weeks, I would almost guarantee that many of you are going to have some sort of a payroll day within that 3 weeks. We have to make the business decision of, are we going to continue to pay our employees while the business is down when we don't know how long it will take to get back up? Are we going to send them home? Are we going to have them come into the office? Those are hard discussions to have, and depending on which decision the organization makes, you might bring up an additional problem that you might not have thought about. Is if you don't pay your employees, it might be for some hard conversations with them. Regulatory penalties. I've worked with customers in the healthcare organization, and as you work with the Office of Civil Rights, for HIPAA violations, they can get down to a penalty per file that might have been exfiltrated or breached. And that can rack up very quickly when you talk about how many patient files or medical records that you might be managing for the organization. That becomes a very, very large invoice that comes due whenever they get done with their investigation. Operational disruption. You've got ins and outs. You've got customers you've got to serve. You've got employees that you've got to serve. All of that comes to a screeching halt, depending on what kind of attack it is, and what are going to be the fallout from that. But probably the one thing that I cannot put a number on, and it's probably hard to discuss with leadership at table, is what's this going to do to our reputational damage? Depending on what kind of attack plays out and how severe and how long you're down as an organization, you might lose contracts, you might lose customers, you might lose employees. And each one of those in their own is going to hurt the company in a financial perspective. And there's no way, there's no math that we can put together that's going to calculate that. At best, we can spitball it, but it would only be an assumption. And so reputational damage is probably the number one thing that I would, ask all of you, what can we do? What changes can we make to protect our business reputation? And leaders, I'm going to wrap up with this. Our call to action. Where do we go from here? What are some of the first steps or things that we need to think about as we look to securing our organizations? And we have a true obligation to protect our business, our customers, our vendors, our partners, stakeholders, everyone involved in the organization. We need to start first by assessing, and do we have the right tools, the resources? Do we have the right staff? Do we have the correct expertise at our access to identify our gaps and truly identify where we might have some exposure? Ask ourselves, do we know every device on our network? Think about the IT devices, OT devices. Think about the Apple TVs, the Raspberry Pis, and do we have an accurate inventory of each one of those devices and where they are on our network and who has ownership of that? Can we see all of the user activity? As we've talked about this transformation to the cloud, as we move to things like Google and 365, do we have the tools in place and the processes to back them where we can see all of that user activity? Can we detect data leaving the business? We talked about that, as a statistic, that 200 some days where it takes for an organization to detect a data breach. Are you in a place right now with your tools and your resources that you could identify if someone was slowly trickling out your data and putting it in a pocket that they're going to use as a repository to turn ransomware loose on you? We have to prioritize. Starting today, we have to invest in visibility first secure approach. We have to truly understand and realize that we might not have visibility on everything that's going on inside of our organization, and we have to figure out the ways, the tools, the approach, the resources that we would need to get to that point. Cybersecurity is no longer about prevention alone. I mean, organizations that can see more are going to be able to respond faster and reduce the risk across the whole organization. And that is what resilience is all about.
All right. Thanks so much for that insightful webinar, Brian. It looks like we do have a few questions that have popped up in our Q&A. So let's go ahead and move to that section of the webinar. First one that I see here is, what is an OT device?
OT device, that is a operational technology device. So a lot of the ones that have OT networks, think of public utilities. So think of water treatment plants or electrical grids. Think of sewage organizations where they have controls that are supposed to be separated, critical infrastructure that control how water is treated or released to cities and towns. It even could be for emergency responders. Think of your 911 centers. Some organizations consider that OT devices because it needs to be separated, it needs to be protected in a much different way. Do our best to isolate it. A lot of times in those technology devices, they are typically in a segmented network where there should never be the possibility that one of those devices could be introduced into your traditional IT networks. Good question, though.
All right. I see another one here. Budget is always a constraint. What should we do first?
Open the conversation. A lot of times, even back to when I was an IT director, is when you go to the table for budget conversations, IT is going to be talking IT. We're going to be talking technical, and leadership's going to be talking numbers. Every time that I would go into my CFO's office that I reported to, he would kick his hands back in his chair behind his head and say, "How much is this visit going to cost me today?" But one thing that I would recommend for all of you to do is sit down with leadership and be able to bring the proof through audits or security assessments of where you have identified risk to the organization and help them understand what that risk could look like as an expense to the organization. A lot of times when I sit with leadership at these type of discussions, it has to come across in conversation of, when do you want to pay for this risk? Do we want to pay a minimal amount now up front where we can put the right tools, resources, or whatever the piece might be in place? Or do we want to pay for it after the fact at an exponential cost? So, as IT leaders, start gathering your information, get your evidence, start putting numbers around what that kind of risk could do to the organization, and start building close relations with your leadership team.
All right, thank you for that. I don't see any other questions here in the chat. Let me just double check the Q&A. Oh, I do see one more. Have you seen a cyber attack that used AI?
Absolutely. Sadly, but absolutely. I'm going to say, if my memory serves me well, it was towards the end of last year. Um, there was a specific attack on a firewall that I was working with a client. And what we're able to see was the threat actors were attacking the VPN on that firewall. And we were seeing the attacks come in from varying IPs on varying timelines. So they were hopping from different IP, and they were changing the time frame of when they were trying to attempt to brute force that device. So it would revolve from 2 minutes to 7 minutes, 5 minutes. And at the pace that that attack was occurring, and with all of the other variables that we picked up in the forensics that we were able to capture, there's no way in the world that there was one person behind a keyboard that was initiating this attack. You could tell that this was very scripted. You could tell that they had measures in place to make sure that they were covering their tracks and not set to trigger any alerts on that device. And the best that we could put together is that was an AI generated attack that we watched play out. But yes, it's sad. I'm starting to see these type of attacks become normal. Sadly.